The slaver ship Drun drifted through the rust-red haze of the Sigma-13 belt, its hull scarred from years of hunting and capture. Inside its dim corridors, the air smelled of burnt ozone and wet metal, a stench that clung to every scale of the Zarthian crew. Captain Vorshak moved like a blade, sharp, cold, deliberate, his 4 eyes fixed on the hollow display that tracked the faint blue signal of a Terran escape pod tumbling through space. To most, a single human transport wasn't worth the effort. But to slavers, a human soldier was a prize, strong, defiant, and rare since the war had pushed humanity deep behind their own fortified sectors. "Bring it aboard," Vorshak rasped. His voice was like grinding stone. "Alive. Humans sell better breathing." The crew obeyed without question. Metal claws extended from the ship's underbelly, locking onto the pod. The docking bay doors shuddered as they pulled it inside. A burst of steam hissed across the floor as the pod split open. Inside, a figure in dark Terran combat fatigue slumped forward, helmet cracked, face bloodied but alive. 2 Zarthians dragged him out. Young, barely grown, though his jaw was set hard even in unconsciousness. The slavers exchanged glances. Human eyes were unnerving things, too direct, too knowing. Vorshak crouched near him, tracing a claw across the nameplate on the soldier's chest. The engraving was smeared with soot, but the letters were still legible. "E. Hale." He said it aloud once, tasting the syllables. "Hale." The crew around him didn't react. None recognized it, not yet. They threw the human into the holding cell near the ship's core. Vorshak lingered, studying him through the reinforced glass. He was tall for a human, shoulders built from regimented training, not genetic manipulation. A soldier's discipline radiated even in sleep. When Elias Hale stirred hours later, his first motion wasn't to reach for a weapon or cry out, it was to straighten his back. He blinked, took in his surroundings, then fixed his gaze directly on the captain standing outside the cell. "Zarthian slaver ship," he muttered, voice dry but steady. "Guess I'm the guest of honor." Vorshak smiled, exposing rows of jagged teeth. "You are our property now, human. Best behave. Some of my crew are less gentle with your kind." Elias didn't flinch. "Guess I'll have to take my chances." The captain tilted his head, amused by the lack of fear. "You are bold. What's your designation, Terran?" "Recruit," Elias said evenly. "Terran Defense Corps, 3rd Frontier Division." "Recruit." Vorshak's laugh was a harsh bark. "Then you are barely worth a ration unit. We might keep you for sport instead." Elias's eyes didn't move from his. "You don't know who I am." Vorshak leaned closer. "Then enlighten me." For a moment, there was silence. The ship hummed around them, distant engines groaning under gravitational stress. Elias exhaled slowly. "Name's Elias Hale." Something in the sound of that name made one of the crewmen pause. A thin Zarthian at the console frowned. "Captain," he muttered. "Hale, does that name not ring of the old wars?" Vorshak ignored him at first, but the word stirred something in memory, a buried report from decades past. "Hale," he repeated, quieter this time. "There was a Terran general, Marcus Hale, the Butcher of Nemea." The name felt like a spark catching dry fuel. Others began to whisper. Elias's mouth curved into a faint, knowing smile. "My uncle." The whispers stopped. Even the hum of the ship seemed to fade. Vorshak stared through the glass, the weight of that admission sinking in. The Butcher of Nemea, terror of the Orion conflict, had once commanded the fleet that reduced the Zarthian home moon to ash. Millions dead. The Hales had become a warning to alien children. Do not anger Earth. Vorshak's throat constricted. He wanted to dismiss it, but the resemblance was there. Those eyes, the same cold defiance that stared down fleets. "Lies," he said finally, but it came out weak. "Check your archives," Elias replied. "You'll find the genetic code of every Hale on record. My blood's the same that burned your colonies." A heavy silence filled the chamber. The thin Zarthian at the console fumbled with the datapad, pulling up archived war files. Within seconds, The confirmation appeared. Terran DNA match, 98.7% correlation to the Hale military line. Vorshak felt his stomach twist. Around him, the crew began murmuring. One dropped his weapon. Another took a step back from the cell. Fear spread like frost across the deck. Elias saw it. "You've made a mistake," he said quietly, almost kindly. "And you know what happens when a Hale goes missing." Vorshak slammed a fist against the console, more to steady himself than to intimidate. "You think I fear your dead uncle? Humanity hides behind old ghosts. The galaxy has moved on." Elias's voice was calm, but there was iron underneath. "Then you should pray the ghosts stay dead." The captain turned, barking orders to lock down the ship. But unease had already taken root. Two of his officers argued in hushed tones, one insisting they jettison the human before Terran tracking systems detected his signal, the other wanting to use him as leverage. The crew was fracturing under a name. Vorshak tried to rally them, declaring the Hale legacy a myth, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had already noticed them. The ship's temperature dropped. Static buzzed faintly in the comms. Somewhere deep in the hull, the automated distress beacon from the Terran's uniform had begun to pulse. In the cell, Elias sat with his head bowed, whispering something too low for them to hear. When the youngest crewman ventured closer, Elias looked up, eyes hard as glass. "You hear that?" he said softly. The crewman frowned. "Hear what?" "The clock ticking." He smiled then, small, tired, and completely without fear. It was the smile of someone who had already counted the minutes until rescue or vengeance, and didn't care which arrived first. The hum of the ship's engine stuttered. Somewhere, metal groaned as if under immense pressure. The console lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the ship went dark for half a second before the emergency systems rebooted. When the power returned, the console displayed a single Terran transmission code repeating in silent rhythm. A name encoded in light. Vorshak stared at it, throat dry. "Hale protocol active." The young human watched the panic spread and leaned back against the cell wall. "You should have checked the name first," he said. The words cut through the thick air like a blade. Outside, the drone drifted in silence, its crew frozen between disbelief and dread, the echo of a name older than the war itself whispering through every system aboard. And somewhere, beyond the red dust of Sigma 13, something vast was already moving toward them. Captain Vorshak had not slept since the transmission began. The code, "Hale protocol active," continued to blink on the holoscreen, steady and patient, like the ticking of a bomb he could not disarm. The bridge was silent except for the low hiss of the ship's oxygen filters and the occasional groan of stressed metal. The crew worked with nervous hands, pretending to repair systems that didn't need fixing, anything to avoid looking at the message pulsing in red. Vorshak stood alone before the viewport, watching the endless black of space shimmer with distant debris fields. The memory of old reports burned in his mind. He had read about the Hales when he was a young officer, back when the Zarthian fleet still believed it could conquer human colonies. The stories were spoken in hushed tones, fleets reduced to ash, colonies silenced overnight, an entire moon shattered under kinetic bombardment. The name, Hale, had been the signature that followed every catastrophe. He told himself those were exaggerations, propaganda spread by frightened soldiers. But now, seeing that single human prisoner quietly sitting in the cell below, the stories no longer felt like myth. They felt like warning. "Captain," said one of his lieutenants, a thin creature with silver scales and shaking hands, "we should jettison him.
Now.
Before they find us." Vorshak didn't turn around. "They will find us whether he's here or not. Once the protocol is active, it sends a beacon. It cannot be silenced. Then destroy him," another officer snapped, eyes flicking nervously toward the cell feed. "If the Hales come for him, they'll find nothing." Vorshak finally turned, his expression sharp. "And when they trace the signal here and discover we murdered one of their own, you think they will simply leave?" The officer swallowed hard and said nothing more. The captain walked to the cell chamber again, drawn by a mix of fear and fascination. The human sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady as if meditating. The dim cell light reflected faintly off his bruised cheek. Elias Hale looked almost serene. "You could end this," Vorshak said through the intercom. "Tell me how to stop the signal." Elias didn't open his eyes. "You can't. It's key to my heartbeat." Vorshak's claws tightened. "If your heart stops, it stops transmitting?" Elias smiled faintly. "For a moment, maybe. Then the secondary trigger activates. The fleet will come to investigate the death. There's no escape, Captain." The Zarthian's throat clicked. "You speak like you want this to happen." "Maybe I do," Elias said. "Maybe you deserve to see what happens when you touch a Hale." Vorshak turned away, unsettled by the calm in the boy's tone. There was no hatred, no desperation, just certainty, as if fate itself had already chosen sides. By the time he returned to the bridge, the crew was arguing openly. One group demanded release of the human. The other insisted on killing him before the Terrans arrived. A few even whispered about taking the captain's ship and fleeing the sector altogether. The fear was thick enough to taste. Vorshak slammed his fist into the wall, silencing them. "We are not prey," he roared. "The Hales are dead men clinging to old wars. Their power is gone. We will not bow to ghosts." But his voice rang hollow, even to himself. Down in the cell, Elias could hear the muffled shouting. He tilted his head, listening with a faint smirk. He had seen this before, panic spreading like infection, leadership fracturing under invisible pressure. His father used to say fear was the most efficient weapon ever forged. Watching the Zarthians unravel, he began to understand what that meant. He thought of his father then, Jared Hale, Admiral of the Terran Strategic Command. The man's shadow had followed Elias since childhood. Every academy instructor, every soldier who glanced his way, had expectations in their eyes. "You're a Hale. You're supposed to be fearless." He had tried to live up to that name, but it was different now, sitting in the enemy's cell, realizing how much the name alone could destroy. Maybe that was the true legacy, terror so potent it replaced bloodlines and titles. A faint vibration rippled through the ship. At first it felt like nothing, just the hum of distant engines. Then the lights dimmed for a moment, flickering in sync with the external scanners. The comms officer's voice trembled over the intercom. "Captain, I'm detecting something. Mass displacement, large ship signatures entering the system." Vorshak froze. "How many?" "2, no, 3. One central signature. Heavy cruiser class, Terran registry." "Identify." "The TSS Valiant, sir." The captain's throat went dry. The Valiant, the flagship of the Terran Hale fleet. It wasn't just a rescue ship, it was a message from the edge of extinction itself. For a long moment no one spoke. The crew stared at the readings as though staring into a grave. The Valiant's arrival wasn't fast. It was deliberate, like a predator taking its time to let the prey understand what was coming. Vorshak turned to the cell feed again. Elias had opened his eyes. He must have felt it too, the faint tremor in the hull as the destroyer's gravitational field brushed the slaver ship. "Your people are here," Vorshak said through clenched teeth. Elias stood slowly, stretching his shoulders. "Told you the clock was ticking." "Call them off," the captain demanded. "Tell them you're unharmed. I will release you." Elias looked into the camera. "You don't call off the Hales. They don't come for negotiation." Vorshak slammed his claws against the wall. "Then you doom us all. You doomed yourselves the second you opened that pod." The bridge erupted with alarms. The proximity sensors lit up, painting the darkness outside with crimson outlines of approaching vessels. The Valiant loomed into view like a moving continent, its hull plated in obsidian armor, its engines glowing with a white intensity that hurt to look at. Along its side, engraved in silver, were the words that had haunted alien fleets for generations. "Mercy is for the living." The Zarthian crew stared in silence. Even Vorshak felt his body tremble. For the first time in years, he was afraid to breathe. He watched as the Valiant's communications array rotated toward them. The slaver ship's sensors lit up under the targeting beams. A single encrypted message cut through every frequency on the drone's comm system. It was not a threat. It was an announcement. Hale Recovery Protocol. Final notice. Vorshak's mind raced, weighing impossible choices. Fight? Flee? Surrender? But none of those words meant anything anymore. The name Hale had already sentenced them the moment it was spoken aloud. Down in the cell, Elias closed his eyes again and whispered to himself, "They always come." The deck shuddered under a distant impact. No explosion, not yet, but the first warning shot of a fleet that never missed twice. Vorshak gripped the railing, staring into the dark void that now glowed with Terran light. He realized too late that there was never a chance for mercy. The transmission from the Valiant repeated one last time before the signal locked. Beginning extraction. Stand by. The air on the drone seemed to grow colder. Somewhere deep in its hull, metal began to creak under invisible pressure. Every member of the crew understood what was coming, even if none dared speak it aloud. The name Hale was no longer a warning. It was a promise. The drone shook under the weight of its own fear. Every light on the bridge bled red, and the ship's proximity alarms howled like dying animals. Through the fractured viewport, the Terran destroyer TSS Valiant filled the starscape, a dark leviathan blotting out everything behind it. Its engines burned with white fire, no longer mere propulsion but declaration. The Hale fleet had arrived. Captain Vorshak gripped the railing, claws digging grooves into the metal. He could taste iron in the recycled air. "Prepare defensive drones," he commanded, his voice trembling despite his effort to steady it. "Charge plasma batteries, full rotation." No one moved. The crew exchanged hollow glances. To fight the Hales was to die before the first shot. The stories of Nemia Prime weren't distant myths anymore. They were breathing in the air, reflected in the eyes of the human still sitting calmly in his cell. "Do it," Vorshak roared. But even the ship's AI hesitated, the command relays choking under Terran interference. On every display, the same message pulsed again. Beginning extraction. Stand by. Below decks, Elias Hale stood with his palms flat against the glass of his cell door. The hum of the approaching warship resonated through his bones. He could feel it, a rhythm older than himself, the sound of his lineage returning. The Hale fleet didn't arrive quietly. It arrived like judgment. The floor beneath him vibrated as something massive latched onto the hull. There was no explosion, no blinding beam, only silence followed by the hiss of breached atmosphere. A moment later, the reinforced door of his cell buckled inward. Two armored figures stepped through the haze of vapor, clad in matte black exosuits with the Hale insignia etched on their shoulders. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical. One of them spoke through his helmet, voice deep and distorted. Identification confirmed. Recruit Elias Hale, priority extraction. Elias's lips parted in a faint smile. Took you long enough. They didn't reply. One placed a stabilizer band around his wrist, an automatic medical seal, and motioned for him to follow. On the bridge, Vorshak's sensors detected internal boarding signatures. "They're inside," someone gasped.
"How?"
Vorshak barked. "Our shields." "They walked through them," the officer whispered. No alarms triggered. "They're inside the core sectors already." Before the captain could respond, the bridge doors exploded inward. The sound wasn't thunderous, it was surgical, precise, a pulse that left no echo. 3 Terran Marines entered, weapons drawn but calm, their armor glistening like liquid shadow. Vorshak froze. His crew backed away instinctively, weapons lowering before they even made the choice. The men didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply were, and that was enough to make even a war-hardened slaver drop his blaster. Then a 4th figure entered behind them. Taller, older, wearing no helmet, his face marked with the discipline of command and the weight of countless campaigns. His uniform bore the insignia of a Terran admiral, and on his chest, a single silver stripe curved around the Hale family crest. Jared Hale. The captain had seen his image in classified dossiers, the man responsible for annihilating 7 Zarthian colonies during the Orion War. His presence was as suffocating as gravity. The air in the bridge seemed to thin. Vorshak tried to stand taller, but the effort only emphasized his shaking limbs. "Admiral Hale," he said, forcing the words out. "We didn't know your son." Jared's gaze cut through him like a blade. "You knew enough to cage a human soldier." His voice carried no volume, yet it filled every corner of the room. "And you knew enough to laugh while doing it." Vorshak's mandibles clicked nervously. "We meant no offense. We will release him to you immediately. No harm done." Jared's expression didn't change. "You misunderstand. There is no release. There is only judgment." Behind him, 2 Marines dragged Elias onto the bridge. He looked worn but unbroken. Father and son locked eyes, and the silence between them was heavier than any reunion could bear. Elias straightened. "Admiral." Jared's jaw tightened, but a flicker of something human passed through his eyes. "You wore the name well." "They recognized it," Elias said quietly. "Even before the beacon. They always do." Jared turned back to the captain. "You see, Vorshak, our family name isn't a banner. It's a sentence. The galaxy remembers because we made sure it would." Vorshak tried to speak, but words failed. Sweat trickled down his neck ridges. "Admiral Hale, please. There must be terms. Compensation. We can serve the Terran fleet. Our vessels." Jared stepped closer until his shadow eclipsed the alien's trembling form. "You've already served," he said, voice low. "As an example." At that, he turned to his Marines. "Secure all surviving crew. Transfer them to containment. Standard Hale protocol." The Marines nodded, their movements efficient, almost ritualistic. Each Zarthian was fitted with a neural restraint band, locking their muscles in place. There was no struggle, only the sound of surrender. Elias watched silently, unsure whether to feel pride or disgust. His father's efficiency was beautiful and horrifying at once. This was power stripped of mercy, a legacy too vast for conscience to survive. As the Marines escorted the prisoners away, Vorshak fell to his knees. "You'll destroy us all," he rasped. "Your kind, your name, it poisons everything it touches." Jared paused at the threshold. "It's not poison," he said without looking back. "It's memory." He pressed a command chip to his wrist console. A deep, resonant hum filled the air as a timed sequence began to activate through the drone's core. The lights flickered once, twice. Elias frowned. "You're going to blow the ship?" "Containment protocol," Jared said. "No witnesses. No trails." "Father." Jared turned to him, eyes cold steel. "This is the cost of keeping the galaxy afraid. You understand that now." Elias hesitated, his throat tight. "I understand, but fear isn't respect." Jared studied him for a long moment. "Respect fades. Fear endures." The Marines guided them back through the scorched halls. Behind them, the slaver ship trembled, the hum of its dying reactor rising toward a dreadful crescendo. Through a breach in the hull, Elias caught one last glimpse of Vorshak kneeling in the red light, whispering something he couldn't hear. Perhaps a prayer, or maybe a curse. Then the drone vanished in a silent blossom of fire, its fragments swallowed by the void. Aboard the Valiant, the crew watched the detonation from the observation deck. No one spoke. The explosion's light reflected in Jared's eyes, burning faintly before fading to darkness. Elias stood beside him, expression unreadable. "They were terrified," he said quietly. "The name did all the fighting." Jared nodded once. "It always does." The Valiant began its slow rotation, engines igniting for departure. Through the endless black, the Hale crest glowed faintly against the ship's armor, an emblem not of peace, but of remembrance. As the destroyer turned toward the Terran frontier, Elias let his gaze linger on the dying light of the explosion behind them. Somewhere inside him, pride and unease wrestled for dominance, and neither won. He finally spoke, more to himself than anyone. "The galaxy remembers our name, Father. The question is, what for?" Jared didn't answer. He simply placed a hand on his son's shoulder and looked ahead into the dark, where war and legacy waited like old friends. Behind them, the stars outside the Valiant stretched into long silver threads as the destroyer entered warp, the hum of its engines steady and low like a heartbeat beneath metal. The warship moved through the void with purpose, a blade sheathed but never dulled. Within its command deck, silence ruled, a silence born not of peace, but of reflection. The crew worked quietly, knowing the aftermath of a Hale operation was never discussed aloud. The mission was complete. The message had been sent. The name had spoken for itself once again. Elias stood near the viewport, watching the distant remnants of the drone flicker into invisibility. The explosion had ended hours ago, yet its image remained sharp in his mind. The fire, the void, the faces of those who had realized too late who they had captured. He had seen many things in training simulations, but none had prepared him for the real weight of what his family's name could do. It was not power in the sense of strength. It was domination by reputation. Fear was a weapon sharper than any blade, and it was forged long before he was born. Behind him, Admiral Jared Hale entered quietly, the hiss of the automatic door the only sign of his arrival. He carried no commanding presence now, only the calm of someone who had lived with inevitability for too long. "You haven't left this deck since the detonation," he said. Elias didn't turn. "I wanted to see it disappear." "It already has," Jared replied. "Space forgets quickly." Elias's eyes flicked toward the reflection of his father in the viewport glass. "No, it doesn't. Not when we burn our names into it." Jared approached, stopping beside him. The light from the console illuminated the scars lining the older man's face, faint ridges earned from battles fought across too many systems. The galaxy remembers the Hales because it has to. Fear keeps the peace. Fear keeps humans alive. Elias's voice was quiet, measured. Peace built on fear isn't peace. It's control. Jared studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You sound like your mother." "I sound like someone who's tired of being a myth." Elias turned to face him fully. "Those aliens didn't know me. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of what the stories said I was. Maybe that's worse than being hated." "The stories keep us safe," Jared said. "When a Hale is captured, entire fleets move. When the name appears, enemies surrender. That's not hate, it's order." Elias shook his head. "It's fear pretending to be order. You didn't have to destroy them. They took a Hale," Jared said simply. "That's all that mattered." For a moment, neither spoke. The stars outside blurred as the ship accelerated deeper into warp, streaks of light bending around the hull like ghosts. Elias looked at the symbol engraved above the viewport, the Hale crest, the same emblem stamped onto every weapon, every fleet under their command. To others, it was legend. To him, it felt like a chain. He walked toward the console, pulling up the recorded transmission logs. Across the galaxy, hundreds of minor relay stations had already intercepted fragments of the drone's destruction. He read the transmissions silently. Reports from trade vessels, scattered colonies, and border stations all carried the same whisper, repeated across 100 worlds. The Hales have returned. The name rippled like thunder through the void, reshaping the balance of fear across civilizations. To alien warlords, it was a nightmare. To the Terran Federation, it was reassurance. To Elias, it was a burden growing heavier with every echo. "They're talking about us again," he said finally. "Everywhere. You've made sure of it." Jared looked over his shoulder at the display, but didn't react. "Let them talk. Fear maintains distance. Distance keeps us alive." Elias closed the feed. "And what keeps us human?" The question lingered. Jared's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer right away. "Humanity doesn't survive by being kind, son. It survives by being remembered." "You think I enjoy this? You think I wanted you to see what we become when the name is invoked?" He paused, exhaling slowly. "But that's the point. Once a Hale is taken, we don't ask why. We respond. Even if it means destroying everything around us? Especially then." Elias turned away, pacing toward the center of the deck. The rest of the crew pretended not to listen, but every ear was tuned to the quiet argument between legacy and conscience. He wanted to believe his father was wrong, that humanity had evolved beyond vengeance, beyond fear, but the evidence of their survival told another story. The galaxy didn't respect mercy. It respected memory. He stopped and faced Jared again. If our name is supposed to protect humanity, then maybe it's time it stood for something more than destruction. Jared's expression softened for the first time. And what would you make it stand for? Honor, Elias said.
Discipline.
Strength without cruelty. Fear fades, but respect endures. The admiral studied his son, searching for the arrogance of youth, but finding conviction instead. You would undo centuries of survival for the sake of ideals? I'd redefine them, Elias said. You taught me that legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. For a moment, the silence between them was no longer tense, but fragile. Jared looked back toward the stars, hands clasped behind him. Maybe one day, he said quietly, you'll have the chance to prove that. But the galaxy won't forgive weakness, Elias. Remember that. Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes held a quiet defiance that reminded Jared of his younger self, before the wars had carved empathy out of him. A soft chime interrupted their silence. The navigation officer's voice came through. Admiral, we're approaching Terran border coordinates. Orders? Maintain course, Jared said, but his tone lacked its usual finality. Elias turned back to the viewport, watching the light shift from blue to gold as the ship neared human territory. He thought of the slavers, the terror in their eyes when they heard his name. He wondered how many more times that reaction would play out across the stars, and whether it would ever change. The Hale name was a storm, and he was caught inside it.
But storms could cleanse as well as destroy.
Maybe that was his purpose. Maybe that was how he would make the name mean something else. He placed a hand on the cold glass of the viewport. They'll remember us, he said softly. But I'll make sure they remember why. Jared heard him, but said nothing. The words hung in the air like a vow. As the Valiant pierced through the final stretch of warp, the stars solidified once more into their distant, watchful forms. The ship's engines dimmed, the hum fading into stillness. A new dawn spread across the black horizon, an unnamed system, uncharted, untouched. It was a place where stories had not yet reached. Jared looked at his son, saw the determination there, and for the first time, felt something other than command, something that resembled hope. Then let's give them a reason worth remembering, he said. The Valiant moved forward, its shadows stretching across the stars like the echo of its name. The Hale legacy continued, not just in fear, but in the quiet promise of what it could become. And somewhere in the endless dark, the galaxy listened, waiting to see whether the next Hale would be the hammer of vengeance or the hand of change.